So let's get right into it. On September 9th, 1980, one of the biggest ships ever built sailed into a typhoon and just vanished. No wreckage, no life rafts, not even a final message. This is the incredible story of the MV Derbyshire and the 2-decade-long fight to find out what really happened.
First off, you really have to wrap your head around the sheer size of this thing. When it was fully loaded, the Derbyshire weighed in at almost 170,000 tons. I mean, this was an absolute monster. We're not just talking about a ship. This was a floating fortress of steel, built to haul massive amounts of iron ore across the most dangerous oceans in the world.
And to put that into perspective for you, she was actually longer than the Titanic and almost twice as wide. This was a brand new, state-of-the-art vessel, only 4 years old. It was engineered, literally, to handle the absolute worst that nature could throw at it. So you can imagine the crew felt pretty secure.
And that's the central question, isn't it? How does a ship practically designed to be invincible, with a crew of 42 experienced sailors, just disappear from the face of the Earth during a storm that other, much smaller ships managed to get through just fine? Okay, so let's set the scene. It's September 9th, 1980. The Derbyshire is loaded up with Canadian iron ore and it's on the home stretch of an 8-week trip to Japan. The problem is, its path is taking it directly into something called Typhoon Orchid. A powerful storm, for sure, but one that a ship this size should have been able to handle.
You know, the most chilling part of this whole story is just how normal everything seemed. From what we know, the captain, who was very experienced, just followed standard procedure. He slowed the ship down and pointed the bow into the waves to ride out the storm. There were absolutely no distress signals, no panicked radio calls. For the 42 people on that ship, it was just another rough night at sea. They thought they'd just ride it out. They had no idea they never would.
In the days that followed, the silence from the ship just became deafening. But the official reaction to its disappearance, well, that was puzzling, to say the least. It actually created more questions than it answered.
I mean, just look at this timeline. It's troubling. The ship's owner waited a full 6 days before even reporting it missing. 6 days! Once the alarm was finally raised, a huge international search began, but they found nothing. And then, less than a week later, they just called it off. For the biggest British ship ever lost at sea, the search was over almost before it even began.
So here's the bottom line. The official story was that the sea just took it. An act of God, a force of nature. And because of that, no further investigation was needed. Case closed. But for the families who'd lost loved ones, this wasn't an answer. It felt like a total brush-off. It really felt like somebody was hiding something.
Well, one of those family members just flat out refused to accept that official story, a man named Peter Ridyard. He'd lost his son on the Derbyshire. But here's the thing, he wasn't just a grieving father. He was a seasoned ship surveyor. He knew the industry inside and out, and he started asking some very tough questions.
And what he uncovered was just explosive. It turns out all 5 of the Derbyshire's identical sister ships had developed these huge stress cracks in the exact same spot on the ship. He also found out that some last-minute changes had been made at the shipyard, and now these other ships were quietly being repaired one by one. I mean, this pointed directly to a catastrophic design flaw.
So Ridyard takes this mountain of evidence, what he thinks is a smoking gun, to the authorities. And this was their response. They insisted the whole thing had been thoroughly investigated and basically dismissed everything he'd found. The battle lines were drawn. It was the families against the entire establishment.
This timeline just shows you what a long, brutal fight it was. It kicked off with the discovery of those cracks, and then, tragically, another one of the sister ships, the Coulon Bridge, actually broke up and sank. But still, an official inquiry just dismissed all their concerns. For 14 long years, these families just refused to give up. They pleaded their case to anyone who would listen.
And then finally, in 1994, all that persistence paid off. The International Transport Workers Federation was so moved by their story that they decided to fund what the government wouldn't, a deep-sea search to find the wreck of the Derbyshire.
And get this is the incredible part. After officials had spent more than a decade saying that finding the ship in the massive Pacific Ocean would be impossible, this privately funded expedition found the wreck in just 23 hours. 23 hours. It was lying almost 4 kilometers down on the ocean floor.
Finding the wreck was this huge victory for the families, you know? But as the investigators started piecing together the evidence from the wreckage, a new, much more complicated story started to come out.
The haunting images from the seafloor revealed a truth that no one, not the officials and not even the families themselves, had ever suspected. The wreck proved that the ship didn't just snap in half where the families thought the flaw was. No, what actually happened was a horrifying cascade of failures. A domino effect that started quietly at the very front of the ship.
Okay, let's walk through this step by step. First, huge waves tore off these small ventilator covers up on the deck, which flooded a forward storeroom. Now, that little bit of extra weight probably wasn't even noticeable on the bridge, but it was enough to pull the bow of the ship lower into the sea. That allowed even bigger waves to crash over the deck until finally the massive first cargo hatch failed. Thousands of tons of water just poured in, pushing the bow down even further, until the second hatch, and then the third, just imploded from the pressure. At that point, it was all over. The rest of the hatches just collapsed one after another, and the Derbyshire, this 170,000-ton giant, sank in minutes.
So, after a 2-decade search for the truth, what was the final conclusion? Well, it was both really surprising and incredibly powerful. And it validated the family's long fight in a way that they never even expected.
This slide really shows you the final twist in the story. The families had spent years arguing that a single major structural flaw near the ship's bridge had doomed it. Turns out, they were wrong. The real cause was a whole series of smaller, compounding failures that started up at the bow, something that nobody, not even them, had ever considered.
And that's the most important takeaway here. They might have been wrong about the specific how of it all, but their relentless, stubborn fight to find out why, that's what forced an entire industry to face its own complacency. Because of what they did, ship designs were improved, inspection rules were made tougher, and the seas became safer for thousands and thousands of other mariners. And it leaves you with this final thought, right? The official explanation was simple, convenient, and totally wrong. The family's own theory was passionate, it was logical, and it was also wrong. But their refusal to be silenced, their demand for the truth above everything else, that's what led to real, life-saving change. It really makes you wonder how much progress in this world truly depends on that kind of unwavering persistence.